Hi there, welcome everyone who is able to join us today. We've also got a large list of people who have requested a download afterwards, so welcome for a belated watch as well. Really excited today to be hosting this panel event. So we are going to be talking about effective planning of your change projects, in particular in the housing sector. For those of you that don't know me, I am Esther McMorris. I am founder and chief executive of 9 Feet Tall, and we specialise in delivering complex change. So we are well versed with how you prioritise projects and how you then deliver them. We've done a lot of work within the housing sector. I think most of the people that be on this call and are listening to it probably at some stage have worked with us on various projects. We work across other sectors as well. So really delighted to have all of you here. We will also be offering out of the back of this workshop, meeting today, a workshop around project review and planning. So if you did need any help with your project portfolio, we would be delighted to assist. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to talk about project planning. So in the current climate, there are so many different factors at play. There's different targets, in particular within housing, that need to be hit. There's competing priorities. There's loads of different stakeholders all shouting that they want change and things to be delivered. And it's also a sector where traditionally there's been an underinvestment in some of the technology and processes. So there's a real need to upgrade kind of some of the technology and ways of working as well. How do you do that when you have limited resources and limited budgets? You can't do everything at once. And how do you go about sequencing that and making sure you do it in the right order so you deliver the highest impact? Now, that is a magic question we're going to explore today. And hopefully our panelists will give us some great insight. Really delighted to be joined by Karen, Sarah, Abby, and also Nick from 9 Feet Tall. So before we go, it'd be useful if maybe perhaps you could introduce yourself, give a quick overview of your role and the organisation that you work for. So maybe Karen, as you're on my top left-hand corner, why don't we start with you?
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Stevens, Director of Strategy and Transformation at Stonewater. We have around 35,000 homes, providing places to live for around 76,000 customers, and we work across the whole of England.
Perfect. Sarah.
So I'm Sarah Cole. I'm Executive Director of Business and Finance at Taft. We are a housing association based in the centre of Cardiff. We've got about 1,500 homes. And as a smaller organisation, I then cover off being company secretary, obviously the finance. I've got a head of digital transformation reporting to me and a head of business improvement reporting to me. Plus, just for good measure, I do development as well. So it's portfolio management planning is certainly part of my personal role as well as my main role.
Perfect, thank you. Abby?
Hi everyone, I'm Abby Williams. I'm the IT Director at Live West. We're a housing association focused on the southwest of England, and we've got about 32,000 homes.
Perfect. Last but not least, in the all-female lineup, it's nice to see you, Jen. So Nick, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esther. My name is Nick Paul. I'm a managing consultant at 9 Feet Tall. I joined the organisation last year, having spent over 15 years in the social housing industry, working for 3 different organisations in various different roles, but most importantly within business improvement and within project and portfolio environments. So yeah, lots to share, looking forward to it.
Perfect. So I think, as you can tell, we've got a good rounded panel, so different organisations, and I guess Nick, you bring even more to the table with some of the experience of non-housing sector clients as well. So let's get started. So we are talking about, I guess, what we call the portfolio management, so the collection of all the change projects and whether they're IT or business change, and that portfolio management is really critical for successful delivery and making sure you do the right thing. So maybe Abby, if we can start with you, if you're able to expand, at Live West, where do you start? How do you go about when you set up a portfolio of work. So what's the first steps in this journey?
So at Live West, there's been a lot of focus in the last, well, I'm sure forever, but on strategy. So the starting point is absolutely the corporate strategy. And then we have a number of sub-strategies that fall out of that, all delivering to the corporate strategies. So we've kind of got that golden thread, and out of that inevitably falls the projects and initiatives. And so actually it's I'm almost a receiver of it. We've got a director of programs who really drives working with our executive team to try to, and it is an inevitable task, try to prioritise those different projects that come out of the strategies and the sub-strategies, and to get them sequenced. So a lot of it is around strategic objectives. A lot of it will come out of what's mandatory, obviously in terms of what comes down from the regulator or from government, and then what is going to give, which I think you've already said, what's going to give the greatest beneficial impact. And then how you balance that, and it's actually one of our top risks, I think, on our programme, is how we balance that with the projects that we have to do almost to keep the lights on and keep things moving in terms of running the organisation as well. So there's all sorts of tensions, I think, that happens in the portfolio planning process, which are easy to talk about, less easy to resolve. But yeah, so and where we are at the moment is that because we've got this melting pot from the strategy to the sub-strategies to the things that we must do, things that we have to do to keep the lights on, etc., etc. We've asked everybody to start thinking about, well, really, what's your top 5? Because even if we took the top 5 priorities, we've still got a significant number of projects in the portfolio.
Yeah, and I don't think we've come across anyone who's not got enough. So I think it is a recurring challenge. Karen, how does it work at Stonewater? How do you? I think the business strategy, as you're describing, Abby, is clearly kind of a key headline, because ultimately that's what you need to deliver against. How are you finding that at Stonewater, Karen? How do you go about prioritising?
Really similar conversations to and situation that Abby described. So we have also refreshed our strategic plan this year, which is cool in that it's given a bit of an opportunity to really focus on what's important. But in doing that, identified that we had all of those supporting strategies and they weren't necessarily linking together. So it has actually put a spotlight on that. Again, we're still maturing. So we talk about portfolio management, but in reality, so far, our focus has mostly been on change projects, some of which are technology enabled, some of which are business projects. So we're really trying to mature that. And one of the ways we've done that, firstly this year, alongside the strategic plan, is to strengthen our PMO, so that we've got a much stronger PMO framework, so that the emotional decisions around, what are those leadership and business priorities, is supported by some real PMO science, looking at complexity, size, resource planning. So that's what we're trying to do. It's still a bit of a maturity journey, but we're getting better, I would say, and learning a lot.
Yeah, having that single PMO that gives oversight. Does that in Stonewater, does that give oversight of all change programs, so including IT or
all change programs? Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I think the thing that we really need to bring into that pot more is the business projects that support the strategic delivery. So there's been a lot of focus on change projects that are technology enabled, but there's a lot of other things, as Abby said. We work in a regulated sector. There's a huge amount of change that we're having to manage across that landscape, as well as just the things that the business would like to do. So that's the bit that probably for next year we really want to strengthen, I would say.
And that's really helpful. Nick, just from your perspective, and having gone through this with many clients and even prior to 9 Feet Tall, is there any tips that you have when it comes to prioritization?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on where the organization is on their journey. I think Karen mentioned about that maturity sort of concept, but we see very often that organizations find themselves either at this idea that they have a goal, they have an idea or a broad set of objectives that they want to achieve, but maybe they don't have a quite clear idea around how they're actually going to achieve it, and then being able to actually identify what does that mean, what's the impact of those, and what can we expect at the end. And sometimes that can feel quite daunting, and not really having a clear line of sight around the direction of travel can be quite hard. So in those sorts of cases whereby it maybe isn't as clear as we want it to be, we would really encourage organizations to undertake, that initial analysis phase, to be able to, really understand what is the problems that we're trying to solve, what's the root cause of the issues that are at the heart of it, and then start to actually design out and potentially even go to the point of prototyping solutions, so that you can then start to identify what are the most cost-effective, most high impact solutions that we could potentially deploy. So I think that's the heart of it. I think is about understanding exactly what it is that we want to be able to deliver before trying to set out that sort of long-term roadmap that we might have lined up. Just to add to that, I think we're actually working with a housing organisation right at the moment who are experiencing a bit of this within more at a program level rather than at a portfolio level, and we're very much working with them about trying to set up that initial analysis phase so that we can go in and look at things like customer data, data intelligence that they've gathered through other means, trying to think about if it's their repairs process, understanding what that process looks like. If it's not documented, let's try and unpick that and understand what that looks like. And then I guess the real key insight piece that we don't talk about enough is about the colleagues and about actually their understanding of where those opportunities are as well. So that sort of area is something that is an untapped resource, and they really have the solutions that are going to be the ones that are going to win. So yeah, definitely a key point there.
Key early engagement, absolutely. That's helpful. And I guess, Sarah, I saw you nodding there. And I guess within TAF, the kind of, I guess, the portfolio, the size of the organization is perhaps smaller, but you'll be facing similar problems in terms of kind of, I don't know, technology change, regulatory change. Is there a different way that you approach that?
So obviously in TAF, we don't have the facility to set up a special project team. So our projects are managed by our managers and their teams alongside the business as usual, and that creates a huge tension. So that and the portfolio is not smaller. The portfolio is the same. It's just our capacity to manage that is smaller, and therefore I think I've described myself as in this field as an experienced amateur. I don't have much project management training, but it's just the years of experience of understanding projects. And in TAF, again, going from the corporate plan, identifying the work streams that are required to deliver the corporate plan, it's then identifying those corporate projects. We've got an awful lot of work going on inside TAF. The people don't even recognise our projects, and then they have unlimited scope. They have scope creep, and they never end. We never get to learn the lessons. We never get to celebrate our successes, and these are the issues. So key to my role has been actually digging through and identifying what is actually a project, and getting that properly recognised and reported upon and monitored. And also great with that was killing some off, which is a very essential thing. So it's once we've identified that corporate project, which I think we'll come on to a bit later, is has it got the clear plan? Does it know what it's trying to achieve? That what is the root cause we're trying to solve, and has it got the millstones? Is it still required? And if so, making sure it's got that ongoing monthly monitoring and support to the individuals, because they're amateurs as well. There's a lack of that skill set, or even sometimes basics of understanding why, and having that time up front is actually going to save you loads of time later downstream. You know, I have to have those conversations with colleagues in the organisation that this isn't a nice to have, this is a need to have, and if they don't doing it, they're not doing the job properly.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, and it is amazing how a little planning, you know, how the kind of the impact of a little planning is huge. So if you don't plan, the cost of projects can escalate really, really quickly indeed. And also like the fact that about the hidden projects. So, and I'm sure I saw lots of people nodding there going, yes, we all have hidden projects. And actually people are busy working on things and they may not be the right things. So actually being strong enough to kill off some projects, as you called it, or put them on ice is a really powerful thing as well. The other thing I'm really interested in is once you've looked at your portfolio and you've kind of set out what you're going to deliver, how do you deal with the unplanned changes? And I know the last year we've had remote working come in, but also recently, I know Stonewater, I know you've gone through helping the Ukrainian refugees and new projects crop up. Similar TAF, I know you've done work with Afghan refugees. There's all sorts of different changes that are coming in through the economic climate that just throw things. Of course, equally, there's people probably within the business who dream up new projects and go, oh, actually, what we're going to do next week is this. How do you go about managing that scope? Maybe Karen, if I can throw that one your way.
I think the first thing is for us is that as a sector, although we talk about reactive quite negatively sometimes, as a sector we do have to act, and it's how we prepare ourselves to react that's the key. And I mean the specific opportunity or challenge, if you like, around supporting Ukrainian and before that Afghanistan refugees was that we have a real passion around supported housing provision. We've got the expertise and the commitment to do that. So that comes out of two pieces really. One is the strategic focus again. It's important to us and our values, but it's also how we've engaged colleagues in change and in that sort of future visioning, so that there's the creativity enabled to bring ideas forward. So I think that's important in terms of helping organisations to find solutions, because realistically, in the sector we work at, although we're quite well planned in what we know we want to deliver through this year's strategic plan and the customer strategy and the home strategy and the environment strategy, the science that I talked about before and having that stakeholder engagement, both about where we're going and what resources and choices we have, and having a process to help have those discussions has helped along the way. Having said that, is it easy to stop? I'd love to learn some lessons from Sarah, because stopping things is really, really hard. We find it's about, oh yeah, this is another opportunity, this is another challenge. Ultimately, I guess as well within our business, it's you know, there are things that will come at us, such as risk. So there's risk and opportunity. We have to prioritise those. That's the point at which things might be paused. But it's going back to the sort of the crux of the strategy and your values, and having a process to make good decisions, I suppose. No easy answer, but
no, and I think perhaps it sounds like a bit of a balance of the two, in that you're building in for some unplanned, because you know there's going to be unplanned change, but you don't know quite what that is. So having some capacity is useful. And then we'll come back to Sarah on how we stop projects, because it sounds like she's got that one cracked. Before we go to you, Sarah, I was going to ask Abby a question around, and I know, Abby, you've had loads of changes and you've gone through the merger process as well. And I'm sure there's been lots of changes in the portfolio to say, actually, if we do that and we can't do that. And how, because it's easy to say, but how do you manage stakeholders in that? And how can you get exec buy-in to, you know, to the fact that, you know, perhaps you are changing direction or you're doing certain things and not other things?
I think it's really tremendously hard because the execs themselves have different priorities inevitably. I think one of the things that Live West has done absolutely right is they put in at the board level an executive director of digital and business change. And I think from an organisation structure perspective, that's really important because it basically means in the at that exec level, there is somebody who is pivotal to looking at how these transformation initiatives in whatever hue are organised, and understands that there are multiple tensions, and there are inevitably multiple tensions. That doesn't mean though that it's cracked, because if it was cracked we probably wouldn't be sitting here, we'd be sitting on a beach in Barbados, I suppose. Because I think it's a real challenge. We talked about the prioritisation in terms of the top 5, but that's still an awful lot of priority, so that's a problem. So I think really the focus has to be on where items are likely to make the greatest impact, and I think it ties in with really what are the key things to the organisation. And I'm sure, like all housing association, safety is our biggest priority, so anything that's going to have a safety element associated is going to be right up there in terms of prioritisation. You know, it's kind of understanding that nuance. The other thing that I think, certainly in Live West, because we've had a major merger, is change absorption rates, and understanding that, you know, like all of us, we'll have really aggressive portfolios, but there's only so much change that people can absorb. So really it's being able to have that maturity of conversation at the exec and down to the next level of senior management as to and beyond, as to how much change can we absorb, and also, and this is where, from an IT perspective, I feel like I'm poacher come gamekeeper, because my previous role I was managing a portfolio. With this role I'm managing the IT, and of course we bottleneck, and we're not, it's not just IT, comms and marketing will end up bottlenecking, you know, the central functions really, in effect. And so that there has to be almost a realistic conversation around capacity planning. And I think it's only when really things hit the wall then sometimes that you know, an organisation really starts to focus on really what can we actually do. So I think, so that's my view, but the structures make a big difference. If the structures are set up well, then I think it enables that maturity of conversation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think, Nick, I'm going to just loop you in here just briefly from a kind of a non-housing perspective. I guess we often look at portfolios of work, and often the clients have been done in isolation, so the exec perhaps hasn't had buy-in, and we do facilitate those workshops with the exec to actually get it all out in the open and say, actually, you know, this is all you've got, what are you going to deliver? How have you found that as a way, Nick? Is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, for sure. I think having a shared vision behind your portfolio and your programs, I think, is actually really critical. You know, we've talked about stakeholder buying across the board, but at the top level, if you really want to be moving in the right direction and all in alignment, then that is absolutely vital. I think those conversations can be quite challenging, because obviously you will have polarizing views. But ultimately everybody's there for the same reason, and you know, as we said, these are very much underpinned by the strategy. So you know, as was said around the strategic priorities that your organisation is aligned to, very much in terms of the way that the portfolio needs to be delivered will ultimately be aligned to that too. So yeah, we enjoy those conversations. Like I said, they can be challenging, but I think understanding that what we're trying to achieve is something about moving the organisation forwards really brings people together. So yeah, they're very worthwhile.
Worthwhile the battle, indeed. And Sarah, I guess with a slightly smaller portfolio, perhaps, how do you then go about, I guess, how do you go about working out your critical path? Because there's always things. There's so many moving things. Have you got a way that you adopt?
So I think the key thing is, as I say, having first of all identified those projects and really brought them out into the open, so they're being properly monitored. We discuss that then at the ethos team, the senior management team, what's happening and where things are getting stalled. And those conversations allow us to really focus in on what are the priorities. We had however, it's been interesting, you know, we had the corporate plan, we had the commitments to the corporate plan, but I was still getting feedback that there was a lack of understanding what people needed to be doing first. We then had to set up like a vision statement that sat across it as well, that gave some context. And it was interesting, you were saying safety. I mean, we sort of take that as a given, sort of focusing and putting the customer back in the centre in terms of their needs. And it was very clearly defined, their needs, not their wants, their needs. Excuse me. So I think in terms of that critical path then, and I'm glad you used that phrase, because when you put sequencing, I had to Google it and make sure that it's what I understood. So yeah, critical path. You know, for those of you who you know are new to this, what does absolutely need to be done first? What can happen simultaneously? And then the challenge for TAF is, if it can happen simultaneously, have we got the resources for it to happen simultaneously? Because that, or can we buy it in, or is there another way around it so that we can merge it at the appropriate time? And that's some of the issues for us, is finding resources. So you're talking about stopping projects. The key to this is recognizing the emotional buy-in that people have with certain projects, and you want to capture that emotional buy-in, because there's an enthusiasm there that you can really get projects moving on. So a lot of the time, it's just about coming alongside a person and looking to refocus them and sort of find out what is as you say, the root cause of what they're trying to solve, and just sort of nudge them into perhaps a better space, and saying, well, maybe we'll pause this one while we concentrate on this, because it's in the critical path. It's better if this thing comes first. And then when you can get buy-in to that, you can find that sometimes you can just gently mothball and eventually kill off as the enthusiasm moves elsewhere. And that's been my way of looking to not have to do everything myself, and use that enthusiasm and motivation that other people have.
Yeah, I like that. You put it in the bin, it goes in the black container, and then it goes out on the road, so we can stage it out. So very good, very good. Thank you for that, Sarah. When looking at planning, and I'm going to kind of ask you, Abby, because you've got a sizable portfolio as well. Have you benefited from any technology or tools when you come to doing that? What works for you?
So in the West, our project managers all use Microsoft Project. I think that's pretty standard. And where we've been really trying to work the tool a little bit harder in terms of using resource pools, we have regular meetings between our project managers and our IT team to look at capacity, going back to that point that IT is often a challenge in terms of our capacity. We've also been making quite a lot of use of DevOps.
Okay, yeah.
And not just on projects, but also how we manage change more generally into when we want system changes. And that's allowing us as well to start to look at capacity a bit more, but also managing. We're doing a project at the moment where we're using DevOps to set up all our test management, so we can do what's called traceability in terms of going from the requirements to the testing to the findings. So we're finding that we've brought in new people into IT who've got more experience of DevOps, and we're learning from them actually in terms of how we can incorporate that within the classic project management approach, and that's working. I think that's working really well. We're going to get some really good benefits. And again, we've also got somebody in IT who's really come from a test management background, so we're starting to buy tools to really help us with our testing, moving away from how we were doing it, which was very, creating scripts in Excel and going through and that process to actually making it a lot more streamlined, and again through using DevOps. So hopefully it will mean that the activity of project delivery will ease and speed up. The proof will be in the pudding. We shall see that, because we're using it on a couple of projects at the moment, and it might change the way we do things. And what I anticipate is it will be a blend of technologies, as it often is, isn't it? So that's what
I think it's interesting, and I think, I guess one of the pieces of advice probably for anyone who's listening is there is a lot of really good tools out there, and you probably already have some in your business that you can leverage, and ultimately then it comes down to good implementation. So with any of these tools, if bad data goes in, bad data comes out. So your resource plan's only ever going to be as good as the data that you put in as well. So but it is useful to know that some really good tools out there. And when it then comes to kind of managing it in terms of governance, so you've got your portfolio, you know what you're going to do. Have you, maybe Sarah, if you got kind of, how do you work out the right levels of governance, and do you have a methodology or a set way of this is how all projects are going to be delivered?
We have one, but it's sort of work in progress, because there's a lack of project management skills awareness throughout the team. So just the idea that there is meant to be a template for any project that should be filled in to have that basic plan. I'm having to strip that back for people, and then look to work with them to expand it where needed, rather than at the moment it just becomes a barrier in itself in terms of having to fill in that template. As I say, the key thing is just those conversations, identifying those core projects, and then making sure the monitoring is going on, and having those supported conversations and identifying where something is just not working, so that we can say, well, what do we want to do with this? Is this coming to an end? Do we need to have, is the problem still there? How else can we look to fix this? So it's at the moment it's all held within the senior management team. We haven't really got much going through to board, but I think that probably because that newish corporate plan hasn't got the really properly agreed measures of success in that corporate plan. So once we've got those clear measures of success, then the projects that are supporting our delivery of those will become much more critical for the board to have some sort of line of sight on. But without that, it's sort of the reason for the dialogue, it isn't quite there. But yeah, I think it's a work in progress. We have got a methodology, but it's flexing as we sort of see the challenges.
Thank you. And Karen, how does it work at Stonewater? Do you have kind of a clear view of your portfolio and how each of the, or call it portfolio or oversight of programs, and how each of them are performing?
Pretty much. I mean, just to reflect on some things that Abby and Sarah have said as well. So I think one of the benefits of working virtually, which we still largely are, actually, and there's been a huge amount of change within the organisation in the last 2 years, is that in a way more has to be said. So we're probably seeing other people in other teams across those directorates, across that whole portfolio more than ever. So within our portfolio, we have work stream leads, and they come together on a monthly basis. And this is at the highest sense, because the project managers, the program managers are working together on a daily basis. So we're doing that monthly, and there's a governance structure that's overseeing program and project delivery at exec level on a monthly basis. And of course, as I said earlier, because we're regulated, we are reporting in to board on a quarterly basis against delivery of the strategic plan. So that's quite good. What we've probably put ourselves under more scrutiny for good reason this year in terms of projects we're bringing through. So we've created, and happy to share this, Sarah, if it's helpful, but we've created outline business cases which are really around that project, that problem definition that Nick talked about earlier, and what the key benefits are aligned with the strategic objective outcomes we're looking to do. I mean, I think some of our priorities this year are around regulation and the changes that are coming to us from there, driving efficiency and driving right first time outcomes for customers. So that's to bring in a real focus and filter to what we're planning to do. So I just think probably we have got better at collaborating in the virtual world, which hopefully we take forward as we move to moving around again in a hybrid world. But it has given people a real sense of togetherness in some way. The other thing that, just in terms of selling that vision so that everybody knows why we're doing what we're doing, is that, again, working virtually. So within 2 sessions, in June, we're launching our customer strategy. So in 2.5-hour sessions, we can bring together 400 plus operational staff.
Okay.
Really engaging in that conversation. And that's something that you can do without losing too much impact on the service delivery, because everybody's sitting at a desk to participate in those. Abby, just to learn from us in terms of the testing platform, because we're using that as well within IT, is to engage your business stakeholders in understanding why and how, because we found that although we can recognise its worth in terms of IT governance, it can feel like, oh gosh, there's another thing that we've got to do and we don't know how to participate in it. So I think we've learned that we need to do a lot more adoption around that as well. But yeah.
Yeah, good. That's really helpful, Karen. I think there's an underlying theme of that business engagement, right from what you were saying, right from actually sometimes finding the issues and uncovering, looking at what are the right solutions, right through to actually when you get to testing, why are we doing it and what's their roles in it, and the importance of that. So absolutely, that's really, really helpful. So taking your kind of some of the governance that you've got, and I know you talked about, Karen, around outline business case, and I'm sure there's kind of different steps within your kind of project cycle that you have. It's always tricky to get that right balance of how much governance do you put in versus how little you put in. At 9 Feet Tall, we talk about just enough governance, and it could be different for different people. Abby, how are you finding that, and kind of what's the pitfalls of getting it wrong?
It is a real challenge, isn't it? From a organisational structure perspective, in terms of the way the assurance of the organisation happens, we've got a programme board that meets monthly and reviews where each of the projects are against plan, and all the project managers produce a highlights report, which is agreed with the sponsor before it goes to the programme board, and then they get discussed. And in that programme board, it has obviously all the project managers, and but it's chaired by, as I was referencing earlier, our executive director of digital business change, and it also has people like myself and the director of communications and marketing and the director of HR sitting around the table as well. So we're picking up on the whole gamut of what might stop or how we can help unlock issues that projects might be experiencing, and the interdependencies and the constraints and the stakeholder management points that you were talking about earlier, Karen. So that as a governance structure works. In terms of the projects themselves, the larger projects will themselves have a project board. They all have a sponsor, and relatively, I'd say that works well. And I suppose one of the challenges is maybe the smaller projects actually is what you do about those, because they still need to be directed and managed. But if you put too much governance in, then they fall over, don't they? Because it's just too much admin. On the other hand, I think going back to what Sarah was saying, if you don't have enough governance, then these projects can go off in all sorts of tangents and directions. So So I actually wonder if we do better. It's easier, I think, almost to put a governance wrapper around the larger pieces of work because they're more obvious, they're more clearly defined, and you know that you need controls. It's the smaller pieces with Project Light where I think they can easily start to, that can be problematic. So yes, that's what we've done around governance.
Yeah, that's helpful, and I think you often see that, as you say, the larger programs, because they got exec engagement and significant budgets, they will need governance, and it's just whether you lower your governance for some of or have a lighter governance model for some of the smaller projects. And Nick, what's your thoughts on that? And then also within that, how do you then measure success of a portfolio? So having kind of established the right governance, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think that's right in terms of going back to the conversation we were just having there around scaling up and down the governance accordingly. As Esther said about just enough governance, it's about giving enough control and enough visibility and transparency so that there can be controls and things put in place, but not at the detriment to the progress of the actual projects themselves. And that's quite a difficult thing to do, but I think it's ultimately about trying to make sure that the progress is ultimately being made and in the right direction. So that's where I suppose we come on to talking about measurement. For me, it's a really critical step because ultimately, I know I've come across this before, with other views, is that measurement can actually feel like a bit of a burden in itself. Almost like it feels like there's little value in it, but actually, from my perspective, if you're not sure which direction you're moving in, how can you be genuinely sure whether you're moving in the right direction? So that's the point for me is around measurement is important, but it's about, again, just enough governance. It's about just the right amount of measurement as well within it. So in terms of those measures, I would be looking at probably four key areas that we would be looking to measure. I think most organizations will be looking at, are we actually delivering? So against time, against milestones, those types of things. But I think there's a few other areas that are quite important too. So return on investment, for example, I think is quite important. Are we actually, for the money that we're putting in, are we getting the outcomes that we were expecting? And then thinking about the future pipeline and future decisions that we're going to have to make. Actually, how does that play out for our 3-year and 5-year financial plans? Are we going to be able to achieve what we were expecting to from those things? So using that within our decision-making abilities within the portfolio perspective. Ultimately, we're trying to track those outcomes as well. So not only are we tracking the project deliveries, but actually we're also tracking against those outcomes, benefits, and those sort of key goals that we're trying to achieve as well. So are we achieving our aims there? And then the other one, and I'm not sure if we always do this at portfolio level, although it sounds like Karen is, so there's a big tick for Stonewater there, but resource optimization. Are we actually making best use of the people that are involved in the projects? Are we getting the most out of them? And are the projects aligned to the impact that they're likely to have? So that not only does that have an impact in terms of the overall capability of the program and the projects, but actually in terms of engagement and morale and building that sense of momentum. It's really important that we align those resources accordingly as well. I suppose the final thing that I want to say is those are probably the 4 key areas, but I think we also meant some change. So I think awareness and communication and change is also something from a global perspective to ensure that we're moving in the right direction too. I think making sure that these projects and programs are embedding. Abby, I think you mentioned about, can the business absorb the amount of change that we're expecting of them? Having something there which we're measuring and tracking as part of success as well, to ensure that we're moving in the right direction and we're not ending up, causing chaos within our operational and other teams. So yeah, that's the final ticket on that one, Esther.
Thank you, Nick. Sarah, what's your thoughts on that?
So I just wanted to think from one of the problems I have with my amateur team is the estimates of time for getting to the milestones, and they are wholly optimistic about the amount of time that they are going to take, and get very offended when I sort of look to double it. and because they're just not realizing how, you know, the pressures of the business of usual, and how they're going to make that reality, because it's a really uncomfortable conversation they have with me monthly. So this program, this milestone is this date, and they're having to change the dates regularly, which looks wholly inadequate in terms of, and you know, that's quite embarrassing for people, and they get very defensive about it. And it's trying to think about how to engage my team in realizing that's the amount of time it's going to take with these things. And then there's also the beauty I have when you have a major change point or a handover, as it were, about the reality that it will not be perfect. It doesn't matter how much you plan. It absolutely will not be perfect. There will be something that will come out that you haven't thought of. I can't think of one that I've done where it hasn't been, and it's having those resources ready and waiting to deal with that challenge at that point, because otherwise it just impacts on the rest of the project, because it never gets tidied up properly, and it just sort of drags and causes a drag on the remainder of the project. So yeah, thinking about how to get that reality check with my teams that are running their various projects.
Yeah. Karen, if you got any thoughts on that? I saw you nodding there. So in terms of the kind of reality check, it's a really tricky one. Planning is always really tricky, and I
mean, we're in the fortunate situation, I guess, given our size, in that we do have dedicated resources to support change. So both within the IT team, but also with communications, with people. And you know, that sort of people and cultural change, and that goes around that adoption. But having said that, I agree with you, Sarah, that probably the greatest pressure is on the sort of what we call the SMEs, you know, the people in the business that need to be engaged in that. So that definition of the project, that the testing of it, the guiding of it to make sure it meets the. So what I think our lesson is probably, and it's not an answer for every, you know, for every situation, but it's almost keeping that program manageable. Don't try to be too ambitious. Even in an organisation of our size, we don't try to do everything in the same year at the same time, because actually, you know, it doesn't motivate people that are involved in that change if they never feel that they have the time to do it well. And again, you know, I'm with you that not very many change releases work right first time, but that's fine as well, because they you know, it's about taking that approach to iterate to get something good enough, because as you're developing a project or a solution, you're learning and things are changing as you go along as well. So it's about having that. I think we're going to talk about agile later.
I was just going to say you're segueing.
I'm better at the lowercase agile than the capital agile, because I'm not a trained agile practitioner. But I think always it's about keeping things at a realistic scale for your organisation, and not setting yourselves up to think that you can boil the ocean. Just take it slowly so that people do feel that they're making a difference.
And I think it's looking at some work through examples sometimes as well. So this is what we did last year, so therefore, you know, use that as a benchmark. So I think sometimes learning from the past.
I think, you know, in terms of it's coming on into agile, but you know, the lessons learned, it's, you know, the planning at the beginning and the lessons learned review at the end are almost like the two major parts, aren't they, of really helping you get better at it. And
and it's amazing.
And I think that sorry, Esther, I think that thing about lessons learned, and you have to have a maturity within the organisation for those to be learning and not blame and criticism. And what could we
have done better?
Not
what we did wrong, but what could we have done better?
And we're having a whole other discussion about return on investment, because it's really interesting where we get some people think that's all about cash. and some people that think that's about outcomes for colleagues and customers. So we're trying to balance that too. Sorry.
Maybe that could be our next topic of our next panel event, Karen, could be just return on investment. Really interesting. I think that lessons learned that you've picked up on is super interesting. And there's so many organizations that don't do it. And with the fear for, you know, is it going to be finger pointing? Is it? And actually, that's not what it's about. It's all about actually, how can you do it more efficiently next time, that continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Your segues is neatly into Agile. I was just interested to see, and Abby, what your view is on Agile. Is the housing industry ready? Is there appetite? Is it something that, you know, you are looking to adopt and embrace?
Well, it's interesting. I have a very personal view on this, because I think the answer, as always, is it depends. It depends on the project and the initiative and whether it lends itself to Agile. I remember looking some while ago at something from the government actually about all projects will be delivered in an Agile way, and for me, I just think that's very erroneous as I think that isn't in their digital strategy. And I'm also very conscious, which I often quote, so I will have quoted to others, I'm sure as well, that I remember many years ago going to a talk saying, by Agile, are you talking about Agile as a noun or a verb? I've had to really think about that. I actually think maybe more of an adverb, maybe work flexibly, work quicker. And of course, that means very different things when you're talking about Agile project delivery. So whereas at the executive level, you might mean, I just want things done quickly. From an IT perspective, that might be, I want to use the software development lifecycle in a particular way. So when we talk about Agile, I think there's a real problem with the word, because it means different things to different people, and that allows quite a bit of ambiguity right from the get-go as to what the intent is behind the words, but behind the use. So for me, I think if you're doing so we've just done, and I know we taught, there was, my colleague did a presentation before, I think, 9 feet tall, around in the previous session around our go live of a big resource planning project, a housing management system that we did. That would never have lent itself to an Agile approach. It was you know, merging of systems to support a merged organisation, huge amounts of business change, high level of complexity. Definitely big release, lends itself to waterfall. On the other hand, we've also got a piece of work around our tenant portal, which lends itself to feature release, which allows us to add value and then immediately and then get on to the next thing. So that lends itself to a more Agile approach, save for the fact, and here's the rub, that actually one of the things we really want to do that is improve the way we manage repairs through our tenant portal. And actually behind the scenes in the enabling works, we've got to do 2 huge upgrades, and then we have to do some integration work in order to allow that feature release. So even that is definitely doesn't feel Agile. It feels like a hard slog waterfall. So and we're not really delivering to what the organisation wants, which is a quick release of being able to for tenants to book my repairs. So I think that there's a lot of talk about Agile. It has its place. It needs to be thought about in terms of which projects, and there needs to be an understanding that it's a balance, and there are merits on one side and there are disadvantages on the other, and to have one project delivery approach probably wouldn't work. I've never seen it work anywhere that I've worked, that you have one project delivery approach.
And I think, as you're saying, different projects lend itself better to a certain methodology. We are close to running out of time, so I'm going to finish with Nick and I'll let you share some nuggets on Agile and you know, where you've seen it work perhaps, and benefits that it can bring in the right scenario.
Yeah, I think Abby has done a really good sort of summarizing of all the complexities of Agile. And like you said, it does mean many different things to many different people. But I think from 9 Feet Tall's perspective, I think we like to understand the methodologies that are available, but understand more importantly the principles that are at their heart. And I think there's some really core principles that even if you are delivering in a waterfall way, you can still adapt and adopt some of those things within the way that you're delivering. So you're absolutely right that one size doesn't fit all, but I do think there's some things that we can definitely adopt. So just to run through some of those things. So everybody would have heard of sprint planning, the idea that you are chunking up delivery into small bite-sized chunks and using small teams to be able to deliver on those. Now, really what that's all about is about being able to provide iterative development, as we said with what Abby was saying, but also that ability to adapt and change within your delivery frame, within the way that you're delivering. So it actually gives you a bit more of a flexible approach to the way that you're moving. Whereas with a traditional waterfall plan, you might have got to the point where you're looking to implement, which actually by the time you've got towards the end of your implementation, it might have been weeks, months, years ago since you actually reflected on that plan. So it just gives you a bit more of an opportunity to reflect and change. It also, as Abby said, it gives you with iterative development, it gives you a bit of a momentum build. It gives you that opportunity to build a bit of morale boost within your colleagues, within your users, within your customer base, that actually they can feel development is coming and they can get behind it. So it really launches something that people can really get behind. One of the other things that we talk about is about minimal viable product. And the whole idea around that is about actually what is the minimum that we can deliver that actually meets the needs, the critical needs of our users and customers. And we really advocate for that idea around rapid exploration, experimentation, prototyping, so that ultimately we can deliver something really, really quick. And I think we mentioned earlier about fail fast as well as being a key principle. So that all batches into the idea that we can deliver benefit much quicker, much sooner, and learn as we go as well. Esther, there's loads more. I'd love to talk about it.
I know. I'm just looking at the clock. I am looking at the clock. So I think we've got to wrap up there. I think there's some really good, I guess there's some very good analogies with some of the things that you were saying, Karen, as well, around make sure your scope is small and, you know, some of the agile kind of agile principles kind of move over. We've got 2 minutes, so you've all got 10 seconds each to give you your last and final piece of wisdom. And so what is your one top tip coming out of the conversation that we have today around how you manage these large portfolios of change? I'm going to start with Abby. Go.
Right, well, I mean, for me, it is making sure that you have the management structures in place to support it. I think if you have that, you're 3/4 of the way there.
Karen.
2. So keep your stakeholders engaged in the delivery so that everybody stays curious about how we best deliver it. And also, as the sector, we're special, but we're not unique. So keep sharing between ourselves.
Very good, like that. Sarah?
I think it is really going back to those lessons learned. You know, it's such a useful exercise to do and do it properly. Yes, it does need to be done in a trusting environment, but you can learn so much of it. And then don't lose that learning. Make sure you actually do feed it into your next iteration, because it really is, otherwise it's pointless.
Nick, anything from you?
Yeah, definitely. I would say don't be frightened to go forward. You know, sometimes we can have the whole paralysis analysis situation where we feel like we need to have the full plan and the full idea of everything in front of us before we can go forward. But actually, I think, as I was just saying at the end there, I think there's lots to learn just by trying and actually going forward and then experimenting. So yeah, get out there and give it a go, and hopefully it'll go in the right way.
Perfect. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure spending this last hour with you guys. Some really useful insight. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I think I mentioned we are offering a project review out to anyone who's attending or listening to this, so to help you with your prioritization. The recording will be made available over the next few days, and we'll send that out as well. And just one for your diary, we've got our next event on the 6th of October. It's not on return on investment, that might later on. It's all about customer experience. So we'll send out the details for that. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.